Well, Governor Walz's original running mate, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, spoke at the DNC yesterday, facing the realization that her position in Minnesota government could face major changes in November, depending on what voters decide. Our sister station's KTTC's Caitlin Alexander sat down with the Lieutenant Governor for a one-on-one interview tonight.
Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is sitting down with us at United Center in Chicago during a time of change.
What a whirlwind. Could you have predicted that this is what the DNC convention would be looking like just a couple weeks ago?
No. It has absolutely been a whirlwind, but it has also been incredibly joyful.
With Governor Tim Walz about to accept the nomination for vice president alongside Kamala Harris, Flanagan feeling the spotlight on Minnesota.
Ensuring that we're feeding kids breakfast and lunch, protecting access to reproductive health care. Those are all wins, and I think that folks across the country are looking at that too.
She herself delivered welcome remarks to the delegates on night one of the DNC.
For almost 6 years, I've worked side by side with Governor Walz. I've seen how hard he's worked for Minnesota to be the best place for kids to grow up.
And from the podium, also sharing her name in Ojibwe, as well as a bit about her background as a member of White Earth Nation. Should Walz win the election, Flanagan would become the first Native American woman in the country to serve as governor.
I have to say, when I reflect on this moment, I think about my daughter. Her reality is completely different than mine was growing up. If it's not me, it will shortly be the first Native American woman will be elected. It's right on time.
We asked Flanagan which parts of Minnesota policies she believes are generating the most interest.
We clearly saw the child tax credit that was modeled by the Biden-Harris administration as a real game changer.
However, Republicans back home quick to point out how their candidates differ.
Social policies, taxes, there is a lot of excitement, a lot of noise, and we'll just counter that with good old-fashioned, down-to-earth, being genuine with people.
We pointed out criticisms heard from some in the opposition, such as the timing of Walz's retirement from the National Guard to run for office, and his response to the 2020 riots following George Floyd's murder.
First of all, I would say that he served for 24 years in the Army National Guard. That's an incredible record of service. He continued to support the military and veterans in Congress and then as governor of Minnesota. And to be really clear, Donald Trump praised Governor Walz's response to the riots and calling in the National Guard.
Before we conclude tonight, what is your final message to those folks who are back home in Minnesota tonight?
I would say I'm so excited to be part of the hype crew that is lifting up the North Star State. We are very good at growing vice presidents, and I think we'll continue to do that.
Many Minnesotans are shifting their attention to tomorrow night when Governor Walz will take the stage and accept his party's nomination.